So hello everybody and welcome to our next session at Fire by Alive. For this big interview session, I'm joined by Tony Hanley, the Managing Director of FirePro and also a UK Director of the Fire Industry Association. Hi Tony, it's really great to have you here and appreciate your time. First of all, obviously, congratulations on your recent Fire Industry Association Lifetime Achievement Award. What a recognition. Do you want to walk us through a little bit of what kind of brought you to this recognition and a little bit about your career?
Yeah, so the Lifetime Achievement Award, bit of a bolt out of the blue, quite a bolt out of the blue, if I'm being honest. I have been involved with the FIA, originally the BFPSA, the British Fire Protection Systems Association, when I first put myself up for an election to join the board of directors 16, 17 years ago. And for some reason, I must be doing something right to get re-elected for something like 8 two-year consecutive terms to return back to the board of directors. I started life in the fire industry in an allied industry, which was more radio electronics. And if you ask anybody in the fire industry, I think it's different today, but I think originally when I started, you came into the industry from something that was connected to it, but you kind of didn't get out of bed thinking, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. But people kind of drifting sideways. So that's exactly what I did. And I worked as a service engineer. I actually took a job as a service engineer, literally as when the first British standard came out, 5839, some time ago. And I moved through a couple of different companies and ended up commissioning large, what were then Halon 1301 extinguishing systems. Which was very much in fashion, very much in vogue, and of course nobody actually knew that how much detriment to the ozone layer halon, together with the other CFCs, was actually causing. And then I started an engineering business, fire engineering business, around about probably late 80s, about 84, 85. But there were things that actually got me involved with the trade association simply because I didn't like what I saw. And my first observation was actually going to the first AGM of the BFPSA, and I was probably the youngest swinger in town, and this thing was dominated by 7 or 8 large manufacturers, and it had no dynamicism to it whatsoever. And I felt that there was a lot of things that could have been done that weren't getting done. So obviously, if you've got a voice, I'm a great believer that it doesn't matter what you are passionate about, you should get involved and you should use that voice in order to influence change. So I did stick my name up for election to become a board director, and for some reason I got voted in. And since that time, I've been voted in 8 times for 2-year successive sessions. And I've seen immense change from where it was to what it is now. And I listen, it's nowhere near, the cake's not baked, and it still has immense challenges, but it's a very, very different kettle of fish to what it was when I first became a director. And I've worked in the FIA as a volunteer director in, first of all, finance for a good 6 or 7 years, and then in marketing, and then in kind of membership, and then in competence. So I think I've had a good spread across the board in terms of my involvement with the FIA, and also I think also influencing some of the policy and some of the member benefits. And I'm a great believer that there are as many good smaller businesses in the fire industry as there are larger businesses, because I think there's also a great commitment from a good majority of our members that actually want to do a good job. And it's always a kind of minority that I'm not saying drag it down, but there's a great need for competence, and there's a great need to actually do the job properly, obviously. But that has come about with the advent of more training, the diversity of the work groups that we've now got in the FIA. And I think the recognition of so many of the challenges that perhaps exist today that didn't exist when I first joined. So I'd like to think that my contribution, I'm putting my shoulder into something that I felt at that time, and I still feel quite passionate about it today. It still needs moving on, and it still needs change. We have some immense challenges associated with mandating legislation, because the government fire minister might change, and it's very, very difficult to pin a minister down and get commitment for something that is so, I think in most cases, for most members, is so obvious. And so I think that the journey continues. I'm not hanging on my boots yet. I've got no intention of doing that, because I still think that there's a lot that I've got to offer. But in addition to that, the trade association actually does need more younger voices. Like any organisation, any member organisation, there has to be a throughput of younger voices, younger people that can, and I know this is difficult, but can give up some time and actually can make a contribution into how the industry shapes itself and how it reacts to all of the challenges that we've got. Because even with a 2-year period, there is some fluctuation that does occur within the board of directors. I think there's 16 and 17 directors within the FIA. And I do believe it is the biggest trade association for the UK for fire. And the length and breadth of the working groups that we have now is extremely diverse, and it's a really broad church of interests that has grown over that period of time. So I've got no sort of apprehension that it won't continue to grow. I also believe that we've got a really, really good CEO. We have done for the last 3 or 4 years in Mr. Ian Moore, and also a good chair in Martin Watson. And we've got some really, really good people. But that throughput of, I think, fresh thinking, people that are willing to put their shoulder in, still needs the support of all of the people, all the member companies, from the smaller companies right through to the larger companies, to want to continue with that trend and make those changes.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. And I think you're right. I think statistically, any business, any association, any body works better in a more diverse organization, because you've got the input of being able to bounce ideas around with people who have different thought processes, different ideas, whether it's a younger generation, an older generation, different genders, different ethnicities, so on and so forth. So I think it's imperative to actually continue moving in that direction, and it's really refreshing and nice to hear that that's already happening. That's already progressed massively in the FIA. So yeah, thank you for giving us an overview of that. I just wanted to stop briefly on, obviously you spoke about this immense change since when you were a bright-eyed young lad, just joining the organization. Could you just give us a little insight into what changes you have witnessed in your career?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, obviously, we all know that there's a massive technology out there, and the biggest challenge has always been having standards that can keep up with that change. And to a certain degree, it's nice to see that BS 5839 does get a kind of regular review and a look in and update and this kind of thing, which it didn't, many, many moons ago. And I think in terms of the real change is that like I say, the diversity of the working groups that we've got now, together with the complexity of the legislation that is being brought to the table and people's interpretation of that legislation. FIA is producing a number of guides on all sorts of different subjects on a regular basis now. Because I think as a layperson, I say a layperson, I don't mean that the wrong way, but I think it's it's difficult to actually find where to get the right information from in terms of what's changing, because it is changing fairly quickly. And we just had the Building Safety Act out in October last year. So I think everybody puts their own slant on what it means. But when it comes to what I would call a broader church of unbiased guidance, then the FIA have, I think, risen to the challenge in terms of issuing those guidance notes on not just the legislation, but everything from all sorts of simplistic applications of technology where the standards don't exist. And I think best example I can give you is some time ago when aspirating systems hit the market, and there wasn't a standard, but then all of a sudden there was a guidance note from the FIA many moons ago, which is still it's very much in circulation now, but it's still referred to, so to speak. So I think that the massive change is the desire to grow the trade association into what I would call the voice of fire for the UK. That is very strong now. We actively encourage a number of what I would call smaller vertical interest trade associations and groups to come and join us on the basis that it's not a hostile takeover or anything like that. What we're saying is we've got a fabulous back office of really good people. We've got a fairly well-oiled, never perfect machine that actually looks after well over 1,000 members now. And I think the ambition for the FIA is like no other by comparison to where it started, because I think my first AGM, it was very much this is the status quo and this is how it's going to be, and that doesn't exist now. Like I say, that ambition and that desire and the drive and the determination in not only, I think, to grow the FIA, to become the voice of fire in the UK, but also to do the right thing for the members as well, because it's the members that fund the trade association. It's the members that support the trading revenue. That is a large amount of revenue for the FIA. But we've got to do, as the FIA, we've got to do the right thing in terms of representing the members as well, and doing as much as we can to support them, to give them the guidance. And I think I guess just kind of sprung to mind that, some time ago, under the BFPSA, they were keen to support third-party competence accreditation, i.e. BAFOR, LPS accreditation for companies. Well, we've had a scheme in place for quite a long time. We've got a chap called Kevin Stearns, who's really good at his job, where if a company that wants to join the FA that doesn't have this third-party accreditation, then our entry criteria is you must have the third-party accreditation. If you haven't got it, then you give us the commitment to get it. But if you need help, we'll provide the help for you to get you to that place where you need to be, so to speak. So it's not a closed shop, and it is definitely open to a number of businesses within fire safety, small and large, but we're there to assist the members more than anything else. And I think that's what matters most in terms of it being somewhat inward looking this time, 16, 17 years ago, to a very open outward look. Not just the UK, we've done some interesting reach as far as what's happening abroad. So we had an event over in Cyprus where an FIA, if you like, franchise, but it's an FIA type style of trade association has been set up with our support, that effectively is going to be run in Cyprus by Cypriot members, but they've got access to all of our training material, they've got access to our guidance, etc. And so what we want to do is extend the reach of the FIA and not just for the UK, but into wherever we can as far as Europe is concerned, because we have a number of manufacturers that are still here, that are still in existence, that are actually designing and manufacturing products in the UK, which for export, which is a massive part of our output and a massive part of our commitment to supporting our members as well. So, I could go on for a long while in terms of what's changed, but it's very, very positive indeed.
Fantastic. And I think I think the word that comes to mind is that collaborative approach. And that's something that is so poignant in the fire industry. And when you say about, kind of reaching out and setting up, working bodies in different countries and having a more international approach, I think that is something that is very important at the moment, where we're kind of looking more to instigate more international standards and safety for all. And especially, since Grenfell, I think that raised fire safety standards and brought it into the spotlight for the public, all over the world. And,
Correct.
Obviously that was such a tragedy, but hopefully it can instigate some positivity going forward and protecting lives going ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing that is massively under-recognised is the fact that British standards are recognised all over the world. Now, we can argue with our American friends across the pond about UL and NFPA and et cetera, but the British European standards still stand, and they're still recognised as leading documents that for guidance, like I say, all over the world. And if they're not, then people have taken all the best bits out of those standards and created their own standards. But if you like, the solid core that's coming out of the BSI, that's creating those standards for Europe and influencing what's going on in Europe, is still immensely strong here in the UK, and it should be as well.
Definitely. And I think also, just to hover a tad on, you mentioned earlier about the Building Safety Act, and obviously all the amendments and changes that is coming with that, and the difficulties as well. You can't have huge changes to standards and legislation and regulations without having a lot of challenge and a lot of difficulty from industry. And I think it's important as well to say that producing the guidance, not just for fire engineers or building surveyors and in terms of competency, but also to the building managers. The people are now becoming responsible persons of all of that, having somebody to be having a body to be a representative and a guide to provide advice. What advice would you give now, for example, for anybody watching? I know $1 million question, but what advice was it, just to kind of come to the FIA and ask your questions and get
yeah, of course. I think the FIA is a font of knowledge across a broad church of subject matter related to fire and safety. This thing of the Building Safety Act has changed the landscape, and the difference between that and the introduction of the RRO was that 2005, I think it was a 6 or 9 months lead-in period when that legislation came in that changed the landscape from fire and rescue services being what I would call available for support to becoming a prescriptive service. You do this, you'll do that, and if you like, an enforcement service. Whereas with the Building Safety Act, it literally came in overnight, and all of a sudden people are kind of, oh, what do we do it? How do we do it? Where do we do it? And what's the right way forward? And I think where the FIA fit into that, obviously, on the government websites, there is, if you like, government guidance. Some of it a little bit grey and white, if you don't mind me saying. However, it's one of those things where there are people in the FIA and there are people that or groups that will, I think, untangle and at least make sense of what the legislation requires, and that they're there to support the members and, if you like, the wider audience, so to speak. So, yeah, I think that the introduction of that legislation, perhaps people don't understand the impact of it, and they also don't understand that it literally did happen overnight, and that is a little bit naughty in terms of, in my opinion, personally, with the FIA, but personally, in my opinion, it's almost like an imposition of double yellow line outside your house on a Monday morning. So out of wedlock kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, as an analogy, I think I understand the severity, I understand the reason for it, but I think giving industry time to at least hang on to the lion's tail may have been perhaps a better option.
Mm. And to add to your analogy, I suppose you've got the double yellow lines outside your house with a sign that says parking, but actually the sign now means no parking.
Right.
But, the
Absolutely.
changing of all these different
Absolutely.
terminologies,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
expecting people to understand overnight. I think it's a very
Absolutely.
difficult situation that we're in. But people seem to be, motoring on, and it
Yeah,
does, yeah. So
yeah.
it's
I, I,
interesting. We've
I
got.
think there's um, I've always kind of categorized that there's three elements to the industry in the UK. There's those that do have the best intent to do the best that they can to comply with the legislation with what they've got. There's those in the middle that will kind of pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down, and they'll try to get there, but they're probably not as quick as the people up, in the next group. And there's those down the bottom that perhaps will probably pay lip service to it on the basis that a tick in the box will do. And like you say, with the advent of the Grenfell tragedy, and still, in terms of lessons learned, lack of a house, etc., then the intent of the legislation is good. However, maybe some help in terms of its implementation may have been a better thing to do.
um, and in spirit of, obviously, we're talking about change, we're talking about kind of progression. We're entering into a much more technologically driven world,
Yeah,
with this obviously, new emerging technologies. We've got AI, we've got machine learning, we've got, the advent of, electric vehicles becoming, a
sure.
much more important place in society. How do you think this will, impact not just firefighters but fire professionals as well today, both positively and negatively?
Yeah, you're right. And going back to this thing about technology leads and the standards follow, our company, Fire Pro UK, part of our growth in fire suppression is with lithium-ion batteries. And in some respects, there is a possibility that we may be able to extinguish a lithium-ion battery, but in other respects, we may not be able to extinguish a lithium-ion battery. And I think who's ever making the claim that they can needs to evidence it. But the problem is that we don't have the standards available in order to actually do that. Depending, there are so many variable factors, and in a way, I I gave I can't remember when it was, sometime last year, but on my point at a talk that I gave just on emerging technology is I I I, I personally believe that the imposition of lithium ion scooters, cycles, cars, etc., has been imposed on society without any consideration for saying, well, what happens if one of these things catches fire? And what are we supposed to do about it? And in most cases, I feel immensely, I wouldn't say sorry, but I am sympathetic towards fire and rescue that have to try and, like I say, rescue people, put scooter fires out, and all this kind of thing. And these things didn't exist 5 years ago. Here we are now, and they're there. And once again, well, there you go. What happened with the manufacturer's responsibility in actually saying we've had all of this collaboration, communication, and et cetera, in terms of not just managing the energy capabilities or whatever the technology of the battery is, but also the fire safety element. And this is how we feel that the right way forward is, because we've now got, through this collaboration, some agreement with different fire and rescue services or trade bodies or something like that. But that never happened. And it just literally appeared. And I know we've had lithium-ion batteries in our mobile phones for God knows how. We had the Samsung thing on a plane 3 or 4 years ago, which Samsung recalled lots of mobile phones and all that. But I'm feeling that the manufacturers seem to have been able to just impose this technology without this like I say, some form of, I don't know, responsibility is associated with how they're managed. And then we look at, the noxious gases, and we look at the pollution into the water table and all these kind of things. I just, it's something that I don't quite understand has happened in our lifetime. And like I say, and everybody's now in catch up, and everybody's searching for this holy grail. That is, how do you put out a lithium ion battery fire? And there are people out there that claim to be able to do it, whether it's liquid, whether it's gas, whether it's condensed aerosol. There isn't a standard to be able to test against it because the variables are so big. In addition to that, even with one battery, is it fully charged? Is it half charged? Is it empty? What's the fire load?
And the individual cells in the battery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but like I say, I'm still scratching my head about where are the manufacturers in all this in terms of what they're doing, in terms of trying to help solve the problem, if that's the right thing. It just seems that problem's being imposed on society.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we took a decision going, for sustainability reasons, it makes sense for us to go towards an electric future, which is okay. Granted, I understand that. But where is the infrastructure, and not just the manufacturing and sourcing of materials for the cars, the infrastructure in actually having it in society currently to be able to charge it? Yes, obviously we're putting it in new housing developments, but also, like you said, you can take an electric battery that has already, gone into a thermal runaway, already, propagating, and you could fully submerge it underwater, and it's still alive.
We're going.
So. What is going on there? So I think it's definitely interesting to see. Well, it's worrying, concerning, but it's interesting to see what will come of that in terms of technology.
I think in evolutionary terms, we'll get there. But unfortunately, for the people that have either lost their lives and lost property or whatever it is as a result of that journey to get to finding the solution, I just believe it would have been better to have the solution in the first place before we kind of got to having to suffer everything that goes with it. And like you say, that our electric future, I get it, I understand it, I don't disagree with it, but I just think there's a few gaps that maybe could be filled a little bit quicker in terms of how we reach that position the right way and in a safe manner.
Definitely. And just lastly, before we close up, obviously, as we kind of acknowledged, sorry, my dogs are howling at a siren right now. I'm sure you can probably hear them in the background.
I can't hear a thing.
You can't? Okay.
No, I can't.
I'll re-ask the question then and try and ignore them. Sure. But yes. So just lastly, before we obviously finish up, based on obviously all the experience that we've spoken about, that kind of you've lived through in your generation, but also just through the industry and the progression that's having in just the last actually century alone, to be fair, has been huge growth. What would be your advice to professionals entering the fire industry today?
That's a great question. My first answer would be you stick with it. And find a good mentor, somebody that's, and I think finding a good mentor is probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give, because what worries me is the evaporation of skills and experience and knowledge as people come up to retirement age, and that kind of skill, that knowledge base, and just, I can't say common sense, it's not the right word, but I think just wherewithal, it evaporates very quickly. And I know that the next generation will always adapt, and there'll always be a way forward. But I think the mentoring part of, if you like, evolution and development in a career in fire is quite an important thing. But the really good thing is that we've now got 4, 5, I think 6 universities that are offering degree courses in fire engineering. I still maintain that you've got to be able to hold a screwdriver and kind of know which end, and so the theory is great, but the mentoring comes with people that have done it and been there, so to speak. And I think that having that balance of maybe practical experience over the theoretical experience is equally as important. But yeah, it's a good question, and I think we need more younger people to actually do want to get out of bed and say, I want to go into the fire industry. It could be in engineering, could be in architecture, could be in passive, could be in active stuff. It doesn't matter. And I think the education of what's on offer now, that's changed immensely from when I, first left school. And like I said earlier, you kind of drift into it sideways from some allied trade or something like that. But I would say definitely stick with it. Your talents and your skills are definitely going to be in demand as time progresses, simply because there will be other issues and there will be other challenges that the fire industry will need to not just maintain the momentum, but it's got to build the momentum to try and get some degree of, I think, proactive approach, whether it's in building materials, whether it's in engineering basics or whatever. But I think, for anybody that's coming into the industry today, do stick with it. It is a challenge. Find a mentor, and just keep going. That's the main thing. And I don't think you'll be disappointed, because in 20 years' time, your career will have blossomed, definitely.
Definitely, and I think that's actually a really really good point to end on, is the theme of mentorship. I mean, especially as we kind of briefly mentioned earlier about obviously the changes in competency and how we're kind of leaning more towards an exam based, test based, tick the
Yeah,
boxes style theoretical approach, more so
yeah,
obviously in the passive side. But nothing can quite beat the value of lived experience, and if you
yeah,
can gain
absolutely.
that through mentorship, then absolutely fantastic. I
Mm,
always encourage anyone to get a mentor, and you don't just have to have one mentor. There's so many different bodies
no,
and people
correct,
and associations
absolutely
in all aspects. So yeah, 100%, I
correct.
couldn't agree more.
And I think it's important to know for younger sort of members of our society that the older members actually do want to pass their experience on. It's not
Mm.
like they want to sit and do nothing. They've got bucket loads of experience to pass down, and they're keen. There's lots of different, like you say, lots of different organisations and individuals that actually do want to pass it on, because they feel that there is value that they can still add into a younger person's career. And the other thing is um, the technology is only as good as the hands that it's in. Yeah. So the
Mm.
technology may be AI, maybe this, maybe that, maybe computerized. So what? At the end
Mm.
of the day, it's only as good as the person that's actually doing the job, that actually understands what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it in terms of that level of competence, skills
Mm.
base, and everything in the delivery of doing the right thing and doing the right job, doing a good job.
Definitely. Well, I couldn't agree more, and really good positive words to end on, I think.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Tony, for your time. I really appreciate it.
good.
If anybody has any further questions, obviously, please feel free to connect with Tony on the platform, or you can reach out to the Fire Industry Association exhibitor booth to find out more about what the association's doing. Thank you, Tony.
Hey, thanks a lot. All the best. Cheerio. Bye bye.